People think the hardest part of my journey was learning how to win. It wasn't. The hardest part was realizing that a lot of people were quietly waiting for me to fail. Not loudly, not openly, but patiently. When everything happened so fast, when my name was suddenly everywhere, when arenas filled just to watch me play, I felt the shift. The smiles were real, but so was the tension behind them. It was like the world had already written a story about me and all they needed was one bad chapter to say, "See, we knew it." I could feel it every time I stepped onto the court. Every miss felt heavier. Every mistake felt louder. It wasn't just about basketball anymore. It was about proving I deserved to exist in the space I'd earned. Fame didn't come with instructions, and pressure didn't give warnings. One moment I was just playing the game I loved, and the next moment I became a conversation people argued about. Some loved me, some doubted me, and some stayed quiet, just waiting. That's when I understood something most people never talk about. Success doesn't scare others, change does. And nothing makes people more uncomfortable than someone who arrives too fast and refuses to shrink. It didn't take long for the excitement to turn into expectations, and expectations turned into pressure. Overnight, everything I did was magnified. If I had a great game, people said I was being pushed too hard by the media. If I struggled, they called it proof that the hype wasn't real. There was no neutral ground anymore. I could feel eyes following me everywhere on the court, in interviews, even in moments when I tried to be alone. The smallest things became signals for people trying to predict my downfall. A missed shot, a frustrated look, a quiet night. They treated these moments like cracks forming, like they were waiting for the whole thing to collapse. And the hardest part wasn't the noise from outside, it was the battle happening inside my own head. I started replaying mistakes long after games ended. Nights became restless, sleep came in broken pieces. I didn't just want to win anymore, I wanted to silence the doubt before it grew loud enough to change me. What people don't see is how lonely that kind of pressure feels. When everyone talks about you, but nobody really asks how you're doing. When praise feels conditional and support feels temporary. I remember sitting alone after games, scrolling through opinions as if the truth about me was hiding somewhere in the comments. Some people wanted me flawless, others wanted me exposed, and in that space between love and criticism, I had to decide who I was playing for. Because when expectations get heavy, you either let them define you or you confront them. And I was just beginning to realize that this journey wasn't going to reward comfort, it was going to demand resilience. What made it harder was how quickly the tone changed around me. The same places that once celebrated every deep shot started watching me more carefully, like they were measuring my limits instead of my talent. I could feel it in the way defenders played me, closer, rougher, more aggressive, like they were sent to remind me that this league doesn't hand anything to anyone. Every possession felt like a test, not just of skill, but of composure. I started to understand that being welcomed and being accepted are two very different things. You can be welcomed with applause and still be challenged in silence. There were moments when it felt like the mistakes mattered more than the effort. I could play hard for most of the game, but one bad stretch was enough for people to question my place. I saw the way narratives formed after losses, how every struggle became a talking point. It made me question myself in ways I hadn't before. Was I adjusting fast enough? Was I proving enough? Was I doing too much or not enough? Those questions followed me into practices, into film sessions, into quiet moments when there was nothing to distract me from my own thoughts. But somewhere in that uncertainty, I learned an uncomfortable truth. The higher you climb, the more people watch to see if you'll fall. And once I accepted that reality, I stopped trying to outrun it. I began to notice how differently I was being discussed compared to others. It wasn't just about wins and losses anymore. It was about whether I belonged, whether I'd earned the spotlight too quickly, whether my style was too bold for this level. Some conversations felt less like analysis and more like judgment. I learned that when you rise fast, people don't always want to understand you. They want to define you before you define yourself. And that realization was heavy because I wasn't trying to be a symbol or a statement. I was just trying to play basketball, honestly, the same way I always had. There were games where the physicality crossed the line, where contact felt intentional, like a message being sent without words. I'd get up, shake it off, and run back down the court, but the feeling stayed with me, not anger, awareness. Awareness that every move I made carried meaning beyond the scoreboard, that if I showed frustration, it would be amplified. If I stayed quiet, it would be misread. I was learning that silence and reaction were both being watched, measured, interpreted, and in that constant observation, I felt myself hardening, not in a bitter way, but in a necessary way. I wasn't here to be liked. I was here to endure. There were nights I went back to my place and sat in the quiet, trying to remember what it felt like when basketball was simple, when it was just a ball, a hoop, and the feeling of release as the shot left my hands. Fame has a way of stealing silence from your life. Even when you're alone, the noise lingers. I started to understand that some people didn't want to see me grow into this league. They wanted to see me exposed by it, not because I did something wrong, but because change makes people uncomfortable. And I was changed walking onto the floor every night. I questioned myself more than I ever admitted out loud. I wondered if I should adjust, pull back, make my game safer, easier to accept. But every time that thought came in, it felt like a betrayal, not to the fans, not to the league, but to the version of me that fought so hard to get here. I didn't shoot from deep because I wanted attention. I did it because that's how I learned to breathe in this game. I realized that if people were waiting for me to fail, shrinking wouldn't save me anyway. So I made a choice, quietly and firmly. I would stay aggressive. I would stay visible. And if I was going to be judged, it would be for being myself, not for trying to become someone easier to break. Somewhere in the middle of all that pressure, something shifted inside me. I stopped trying to read every reaction, stopped listening for approval in the noise. I realized that when people wait for you to fail, it gives you a strange kind of freedom. Freedom to stop performing for them. Freedom to stop explaining yourself. I didn't need everyone to believe in me. I just needed to believe enough to keep going. And once that clicked, the fear loosened its grip. I started walking onto the court with a different mindset. Not to impress, not to silence critics, but to impose myself. To take up space without apology. The shots felt cleaner again. The game felt faster, more honest. When I took hits, I got up quicker. When I missed, I moved on faster. I wasn't proving something anymore. I was expressing it. And the more I leaned into that, the more uncomfortable it seemed to make certain people. But discomfort is a sign that something real is happening. You don't disrupt systems by blending in. I began to understand that the waiting, the doubts, the criticism, it was never about my skill. It was about timing, about arrival, about someone stepping into a spotlight before the world decided it was ready. And once I stopped carrying their hesitation on my shoulders, my own game felt lighter. I wasn't chasing acceptance anymore. I was claiming direction. And for the first time since everything exploded, I felt grounded again. Like no matter what happened next, I knew who I was becoming and I wasn't afraid of it. I started paying attention to who stayed when things weren't perfect. Not the loud voices, not the trends, not the headlines, but the quiet constants. The kids who waited after losses just to say my name. The families who showed up even when the outcome wasn't guaranteed. The messages from girls who told me they didn't care if I missed because watching me try gave them courage to try too. That's when it finally hit me. The people waiting for me to fail were never the ones I was playing for. And once I knew that, their patience didn't scare me anymore. It motivated me. I accepted that criticism would always exist alongside impact. That if I wanted to change anything, how the game is played, how it's watched, how it's valued, I couldn't do it quietly. I couldn't do it politely. Progress always makes noise before it makes sense. So I leaned into it. I spoke less and played louder. I let my game answer questions I didn't owe words to. And slowly, I felt the balance shift. Not because everyone suddenly believed, but because I no longer needed them to. I wasn't chasing validation anymore. I was building something bigger than approval. Something stronger than doubt. The funny thing about people waiting for you to fail is that they never see what it costs you to keep standing. They don't see the nights you doubt yourself, the mornings you wake up sore but focused, the quiet decisions you make to keep going even when it would be easier to disappear. But I see it, I feel it, and I've learned that failure was never the thing I feared most. Becoming smaller was. Losing the version of myself that believed this game could be played boldly, fearlessly, without permission. So if people are still waiting, that's okay. Let them wait. I'm not here to meet expectations. I'm here to set them. I'm here to show that you don't have to arrive quietly to be worthy, that you don't have to change your game to make others comfortable, that you can take up space, make noise, miss shots, learn, grow, and still belong exactly where you are. This journey was never about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving something to myself. And to anyone watching this who feels that same pressure, that same weight of eyes waiting for you to slip, remember this. The ones waiting for you to fail don't get to write your ending. You do. Every time you stand back up, every time you choose courage over fear, every time you keep going when quitting would be easier, you change the story. My name is Caitlin Clark, and if they're still waiting for me to fail, they're going to be waiting a long time.